As a psychology-focused narrator, I would frame this as the anatomy of emotional erosion. Not one dramatic betrayal, but years of small dismissals, social exile, strategic silence, and the kind of manipulation that teaches a woman to doubt her own pain. By the time the public humiliation arrives, the wound is already deep. What makes this story powerful is not the cruelty alone, but the instant Ilara finally names it and refuses to carry it anymore.
At 8 months pregnant, Clara wore a silk dress to the gala. At the Chicago penthouse, her mother-in-law, Beatrice, met her. "We have a quiet lounge for you," she said. Clara saw her husband, Marcus, talking with Sophia, who sat in Clara's chair at the family table, ignoring her completely. The real sting came when Beatrice Vance, poised at 65, raised her champagne flute. She toasted Sophia's recent triumphs at Marcus's firm. "Some people just belong with us," she announced to the family, her tone sharp as ice. "You're making a scene. You're upsetting our guests." Clara was alone when he said it. Marcus missed everything, but her brother saw the truth. Soon after, a powerful, well-dressed man approached Beatrice with purpose. Beatrice Vance turned, assuming it was a server. Instead, she faced Ethan, her daughter-in-law's formidable brother, a top litigator. Her social grace vanished before the cold anger in his eyes. This was about more than just a public slight. It was Clara's awakening. This is a story of a woman refusing to be sidelined, choosing instead to build her own world. The lesson is simple. Never shrink yourself for those who won't make space for you. Clara's journey is for anyone who has ever smiled through their pain, when screaming was all you truly wanted to do. It's for every person shoved aside who pretended everything was fine, for those who gave their all, only to find that loyalty to the wrong person cost you everything. This isn't a fairy tale with a wealthy savior. It's a harder truth. A moment of reckoning is coming. It might find you in a penthouse, a nursery, or a sterile hospital corridor at 4 in the morning. That moment will break you, but it will bring absolute clarity. It will demand you leave a life you thought you wanted. If you can walk away, you will discover where you belong. If Clara's story resonates, you understand this kind of strength. Tell us in the comments which part felt most real to you. We see everyone. New to our channel? Subscribe for our weekly stories. Share this with someone who needs this message. You know exactly who that is. Send it now. And if this story brought you any strength, tap the like button. It helps us find others who feel unseen. We'll see you next week. The sound of clinking glasses echoed with wealth. The penthouse vibrated with the assurance of Chicago's elite. A refined voice sliced through the hum. "Clara, my dear, I'm sure Marcus told you, we are rather full at the main table tonight." Clara Vance stood frozen at the entrance. 8 months pregnant, her ankles ached. The cobalt silk dress was her attempt to feel like herself, not just the vessel for the Vance dynasty's next generation. She leaned against the door as the baby gave a sharp kick. No one mentioned alternate seating. Marcus had been curt that morning. "It's a gala, Clara. Just show up." The apartment had a view of the entire skyline. Clara began her nervous habit of counting things. The towering windows, the modern art, and there, at the head table, in her seat beside Marcus, was Sophia Rossi, a rising star from his architecture firm. Sophia was in a severe but stylish pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back, her gaze locked with Clara's from across the room, and it held no apology. It was pure victory. Clara looked for Marcus. Marcus was sharing a laugh with his father, Richard, a whiskey in his hand. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Clara. A flicker of annoyance, not remorse, but inconvenience, crossed his features. He made no move toward her. He didn't make an excuse. He didn't cross the room. He offered a short, dismissive nod. And the truth struck her. This was orchestrated. He knew Sophia would be in her place. Only his father, Richard Vance, made a move to get up. Marcus's father was a kind man who once called her a blessing. She clung to that memory. "Clara," Richard began, "let's get you a seat." "She is perfectly fine, Richard," Beatrice interrupted. Beatrice's tone was flawless. "Clara, We prepared the sunroom for you. It's calmer and much better for your condition. The baby must come first. Clara's eyes fell on the solitary armchair. She tried, as always, to find a benevolent motive in Beatrice's actions. There wasn't one. She forced a smile. That's very considerate, she said, walking toward her banishment, counting each step. 1, 2, 3. She blinked back tears until she felt the cool window pane of the sunroom. The fragrance of lilies was overwhelming. Beatrice's world was perfect. Clara was the only imperfection in it. An imperfection that had been subtly noted for their entire marriage. She sank into the armchair. A small table beside it held only a glass of water. No setting, no napkin. This was premeditated. They had arranged for her to be isolated here. The baby shifted within her, a slow, heavy movement. Clara rested her hands on her stomach. I get it now, she whispered. She pulled out her phone, then put it away. Her phone was useless. There were no words for this kind of subtle cruelty. She set it aside. From the main room, she heard the delicate chime of forks on plates, the murmur of a world she no longer belonged to. She had been part of them for 5 years. She learned the right causes to support, the right artists to praise. She smiled on cue and knew when to be silent. She thought of the preservation project she had turned down, a career-making opportunity she had earned. She declined it because Marcus's firm was growing, and she believed they were building a single life as a team. She reevaluated that choice, sitting alone in the sunroom. She lifted her water, her hand trembling. Beatrice's voice then rose, warm and engaging, for a toast. To Sophia, whose talent is securing the Vance legacy, you're already part of the family. Clara put her glass down. Her hands were shaking. She stared at the lonely chair, the small table, the single glass. It all made sense. This wasn't for her well-being. This was because Beatrice had scripted the entire evening, and the script never had a place for her at that table. The baby became very still. Clara held her breath, a hand on her belly. The elevator dinged. She recognized the sound. It was her brother, Ethan. She just knew it. She felt the room's atmosphere change as Marcus finally walked over. His voice was quiet, managed, the tone he used to handle problems, not connect with his wife. Let's not do this now, he said, though she had done nothing. She had just been sitting there. She looked up at him. He clutched his whiskey glass like a prop. I didn't know she was coming, he lied. Clara knew his tells. The tiny muscle that flexed in his jaw gave him away. He was looking just past her, a sign of his evasion. He was doing it right now. Clara asked softly, how many times has Sophia been to your mother's penthouse? Marcus's jaw locked. It's work. Mom invited the whole executive team. Clara asked, and how many from your acquisitions team are at this table? Silence. Just the one, Clara answered for him. Only her. How long, Marcus? He paused too long. Since the fall gala, he muttered. Clara was still. She did the math. Autumn. It was now late May, 8 months later. Sophia Rossi had been a fixture for 8 months, the entire length of Clara's pregnancy. She'd been in their own apartment a dozen times. Beatrice had called it mentoring. So practical, Clara had thought, ignoring every gut feeling. Does your mother know? Clara asked. About you too? Marcus was a statue. There is nothing to know. That wasn't my question. The silence that fell was a physical thing. Clara knew its weight, its form. She had restored historic homes for a decade. She knew how to spot a fatal crack in a foundation. Beatrice knew. She had known all along. The offers to rest were never for comfort. It was to manage the inconvenient wife. Clara said it quietly, as a fact. I'm not going crazy. I see what's happening. Marcus winced. She studied the man she married 3 years ago who promised she was his bedrock. She wondered when he had become so empty. Had she ever really known him? Why didn't you warn me she would be at our table? Clara asked. He began, and faltered. I was hoping it wouldn't be an issue. You hoped, she repeated the words, tasting like poison. You thought I would arrive at your mother's gala, see your affair at my seat, and just decide it wasn't an issue? He stared at the wall behind her. She remembered Christmas. A notification on his phone. She was just passing it to him. The message was simple. The name of a private lounge, a reservation time, and a single heart emoji from Sophia. She had looked away, saying nothing. The next morning, she'd asked. He called it a meeting with a new investor. He said it so easily, without any of his usual tells. She had chosen to believe him because the truth was unimaginable. Being 8 months pregnant while facing this was a horror she wasn't prepared for. She still wasn't ready, but the choice was no longer hers. Did your mother seat her there, knowing I was coming tonight? Alex's frozen silence was all the confirmation she needed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maya. You've gone quiet, which is a red flag. Do I need to drive over? I'm already getting my keys. Eleanor almost smiled. She was replying, I'm okay, when a voice cut through the event space. Not a yell, not a fight, but Victoria's crisp, amplified words from the stage. Then Alex's voice, a sharp hiss. Victoria, for God's sake, stop. A stunned, absolute quiet descended on the packed venue. Eleanor was already walking toward the sound. She had heard her father-in-law mutter her name. She heard the shocked hush that followed. A crack in the facade that had held for 3 years finally shattered. She was through with waiting in VIP lounges. She pushed the door open and entered the product launch. Eleanor stepped into the main hall just as Victoria was lauding the future, praising the brilliant mind Alex had cultivated from his own team. The unspoken implication could only be Isabella. The room's focus snapped to Eleanor the second she appeared. Victoria, her mother-in-law, was already making her move. Eleanor would later replay that single instant, trying to recall what she saw just before her life splintered. She thought it was Alex's expression, waiting for him to finally act, to step between his mother and his wife, a simple act of defense. He had failed at 100 times before. She would never find out. Victoria crossed the stage. She was holding a sleek custom award. With a deliberate hand, she raised it, showing no anger or loss of control. She moved with the cold strategy she applied to every hostile takeover. She presented the award to Isabella, a new corporate honor, named after the project's lead. Victoria placed it in Isabella's hands. The venue was utterly still. A cold dread, worse than fear, washed over Eleanor. The gesture was a public coronation. She felt the baby kick, a sharp, sudden protest, as if the child felt the tremor too. She stood frozen, feeling the floor shift beneath her. Victoria placed the award on the lectern with a soft final thud. I think it's time you went home, Eleanor, she said. Her tone was calm, almost bored, as if dismissing an assistant. You have created enough of a distraction. A distraction. She had been sitting alone in another room. Alex was still a statue, watching the consequences of his own inaction finally detonate. His face was that of a man who lit a fuse and was somehow surprised by the explosion. Richard, his father, was ashen, like someone who had just witnessed a terrible accident. Isabella stood perfectly still. She wasn't looking at Victoria. She was looking at Eleanor. Eleanor would remember this with chilling clarity. Isabella's face showed no victory, no smugness. Across the room, surrounded by 100 shocked guests, her expression looked devastatingly like shame. Eleanor surveyed the crowd, and then she laughed. It wasn't a broken sound. It was the sound of someone finally facing a hard, overdue reality. She turned and walked out of the hall. She crossed the lobby. She got her coat from the check. She always knew where her coat was. Her mother taught her that at 16. Always know your exit. A woman must always have her own way out. She went to the powder room and bolted the door. She braced against the marble countertop. In her cocktail dress, 7 months pregnant. hiding in Victoria's world on a Thursday night in November. The room smelled of expensive, minimalist lilies, a scent that suddenly turned her stomach. The polished concrete was cold under her heels. She laid a hand on her stomach. The baby shifted, a slow, deliberate roll this time, a silent comfort, as if her son was saying, "I am right here. We are solid." "We're solid," Eleanor whispered. To her son, to the quiet room, to herself. She just stood there, breathing, in and out. She watched 2 minutes tick by on the sleek digital clock. That was all the time she would allow. Then she found her phone. 4 missed calls from Maya. She dialed her back. "Eleanor!" Maya's voice was tense. "You just vanished. You sound odd." "What was that noise?" she told everyone. She knows the whole story. "I'm hiding in a bathroom. My life just fell apart." The quiet on Maya's end was a world away from the silent tension outside. It was the sound of a true friend rapidly assessing tactical options. "I am calling Liam." Maya said it, not asked it. "No, May. Please. I don't want to. I can deal with this. I just need to think. I am calling Liam." Maya's tone brooked no argument. "You can be furious with me in the morning. I'll live." The line disconnected. Eleanor held the phone, staring at her own face in the mirror. Her dress was impeccable. Her hair was still perfectly smooth. Her expression was serene. It was a shock. She expected to see a reflection of how she felt, fragmented, betrayed, adrift. Instead, she looked like a woman whose deepest suspicion had been confirmed and was now deciding on a course of action, which was, she supposed, exactly what was happening. Her phone buzzed. Liam. She answered before the second vibration, before she could talk herself out of it. Ellie, just one word. Her name, the one only Liam and their mother, gone 5 years now, ever used, and a knot in Eleanor's chest. The one that had been tightening for the last 2 hours finally started to ease. "Liam," she breathed. "Something's happened." "I'm aware," he said. She saw her reflection. "Maya must have called you." "Not from Maya." She waited. "I have something you need to hear." Liam's voice took on that quiet, clipped cadence he used before dismantling an opponent in court. He was always surgical. It was what made him a formidable litigator, a sometimes frustrating older brother, and the one person you wanted in your corner during a catastrophe. "I should have told you weeks ago. I was waiting for you to see it yourself. So I am asking you now. Are you ready?" Eleanor met the eyes of the woman in the mirror, dress unruffled, gaze like steel. "Yes," she said. Liam had known about Isabella for 3 months, not from gossip, but from his own network. Liam had resources, quiet professionals who specialized in data. And when Eleanor had come for dinner, with that particular haunted look he knew from their childhood, he had his people start digging. He had been assembling options for her, he said, not to build a case against Alex, but to create severance packages for when she was ready. "And what if I had wanted to stay?" Eleanor asked. "To try to fix it?" "Then I would have deleted the files," Liam said, "and you would never have known about any of this." She knew it was the truth. "Stay where you are," he said. "I am 10 minutes away." He was there in 10 minutes. From the upstairs library, Eleanor heard the chime. She heard Victoria's footsteps on the stone floors. A sharp, commanding sound. Unquestioned. Then the door opened. Liam's voice was firm. "Where's Eleanor?" She walked to the top of the stairs. The landing afforded a complete view of the atrium. Liam stood in the entrance, a silhouette. His dark suit was unbuttoned. His face held that expression, the one she rarely saw. Once after she broke her arm skiing. And again, when their mother got the diagnosis. And the time she called him, from a bad business deal in Hong Kong, utterly lost. It meant, "I am handling things now." Victoria had composed her features. Still dressed from the launch, her posture was rigid. She gave Liam her usual look of polite tolerance. "Liam, Her tone was dangerously smooth. Whatever Eleanor has told you, this is a private family situation, and I must insist you leave. She told me you expect her to overlook his affair, Liam stated. She's 7 months pregnant, Victoria. I'm aware of the circumstances, she snapped back. My nephew is involved, Liam said, along with the woman you just humiliated in front of your entire network. Victoria's self-control was legendary. It held, but her eyes revealed a swift recalculation. She was reevaluating his capacity for damage. Eleanor had seen that look directed at business rivals. But Liam always knew the countermove. Liam was already 2 moves ahead. Eleanor's coming with me, he said. She'll stay at my place tonight. Is that going to be a problem? Alex appeared on the landing, finally. He looked from his mother to Liam, a man caught between 2 sharks. Liam, I know you're upset, he started. You let her ambush your pregnant wife, Liam said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. And you just stood there. The atrium was silent. Alex's mouth opened, then shut. It was the truth, and there was no defense. Let me be very clear, Liam said, his gaze fixed on Victoria, because you don't seem to understand the next step, and I want to make sure you do. His voice stayed level. He knew precisely how much force to use. He used it now. He mentioned a Wednesday call with 2 of Alex's biggest investors. That a woman named Anya was on the agenda. That a set of offshore accounts had become a point of great interest. This can be handled discreetly, he said, or it can be a headline. Victoria said nothing. Her expression, though, was pure fury. Eleanor descended the floating staircase. She carried her wallet, her phone, and the business card Richard had pushed into her hand. She hadn't looked at it yet. She had her son, a real, tangible weight inside her. At the foot of the stairs, she saw Richard. He stood apart, shadowed by a large sculpture, watching a mess he knew he'd helped enable. He wasn't a bad man, she had always thought. He just always chose ease over integrity. She felt a wave of pity for him. She'd examine the card later. I am so very sorry, Eleanor, Richard whispered. She touched his arm as she passed. The cool Seattle air felt clean on her skin. Liam walked beside her, close but not crowding her. He had always been her shield. She slid into the passenger seat. He started the car. He drove in silence for 5 blocks, giving her space to breathe. Then, tell me everything. From the top, Eleanor looked down at the card, Jameson Finch, Asset Recovery, and Family Law. On the back, in Richard's script, the best and absolutely ruthless. You need to call him. She slipped the lawyer's card into her coat pocket as the Boston city lights bled together. Parked outside Leo's brownstone, she finally began to unravel, the story pouring out for a solid 20 minutes, until she just stopped, watching the dashboard clock. Leo hadn't uttered a single word. He just listened, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his rigid focus on the street ahead, screaming his fury. His quiet was always a sign of cold rage. How long? He finally asked. About Isabel. Ilara stared into her lap. I noticed the charge on our Amex statement last month, from a private jeweler. So? He claimed it was a birthday gift for his mother. Then I saw Isabel wearing the pendant at the Winter Gala. It was custom, one of a kind. And you actually bought his story? I had to. I felt like I had no other choice. The words felt weak, but the situation was far more complex. I was pregnant, had just quit my gallery job, and moved across the country for him. His world had to be the real one. Leo just gave a slow nod, a gesture of understanding. He wasn't the type to press on a fresh wound. The last few months flashed in her mind as a series of tiny, sharp betrayals. Victoria's passive-aggressive comments about her taste in art for their Back Bay home. Ilara had always pretended the remarks didn't sting. She had lied to herself with the same hope she'd felt seeing the 2 pink lines on the test. She recalled Marcus's face when she showed him, a flicker of something, just for a second, before the polished smile appeared. Not, "We're pregnant," but, "I need to tell my mother." It was his news to manage. Then came the obsessive late night scrolling through Isabel's gallery posts, searching for a clue. She confessed to Leo about the nightly ritual of checking social media. His jaw tightened. "You've been holding this in by yourself," he said, his voice flat. "I just wanted to make it past the first trimester, to feel strong enough to handle it." "I get it," he said, his tone softening. She rested her hand against the cold passenger window, the lights of the city glittering below. "I deserved more than this." It was a quiet declaration, not a question. "I've known something was wrong. I just felt completely stuck." Leo's only reply was, "Yes." Inside his apartment, the space was a reflection of him, organized, modern, and deliberate. It was sparse, but warm. He put on a kettle for chamomile tea without asking. He'd always kept it stocked for her since a bad breakup in her 20s. She sank into the charcoal gray sofa, cradling the warm mug. The baby gave a slow, powerful kick. Ilara laid a hand over her stomach. "He's awake tonight?" she murmured. Leo sat across from her, his eyes fixed on her hand. A fierce, protective anger flashed across his features. "Takes after his mom," he replied. They sat in comfortable silence, the city's hum a distant soundtrack. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table. "Marcus?" The name lit up the screen. Leo's eyes flicked toward it. She flipped the phone over, ignoring the message. "He's expecting you to go back," Leo said flatly. "He's expecting me to make this disappear," she corrected, staring into her tea. "I always have. I'm not doing it anymore." Leo held her gaze. "Then what do you want, Ilara?" he asked. And she, who had spent years accommodating everyone else's needs, just let the question hang in the air. She didn't search for an immediate reply. She let it breathe in the quiet apartment, and gradually, in the safety of her brother's home, as the tea grew cool and her son moved within her, an answer started to form. It was almost 3 in the morning. The guest bed was made. 14 floors down, the sound of traffic was a low growl. Even in her brother's perfectly kept guest room, with its crisp linens, sleep was an indulgence she couldn't afford. Ilara had been staring at the ceiling since 1 a.m., the hour her own mind became a hostile territory. She picked up her phone and started a new note. It was a coping mechanism from her mother. When life feels like chaos, you list the facts. You make them tangible, separating the problems you can solve from the pain you have to endure. She typed the title, the situation, as it stands. 1. Marcus has been with Isabel, his gallery's new artist, since the summer. 2. His mother, Victoria, knew about it. 3. I ignored my gut feeling. 4. My brother saw them together and gave me a lawyer's card. 5. My son is due in 9 weeks. 6. I am unemployed. I gave up my career as a museum curator when Marcus's gallery prompted our move to Boston. 7. I invested $60,000 of my inheritance as a down payment on our condo. 8. I love him. Or at least, I loved the man I thought he was. 9. I'm not sure which truth is worse. The thought, "I was so stupid," began to form, but she dismissed it. It wasn't the full picture. She hadn't been stupid. She'd been placated. There's a critical difference. Stupidity means you miss the signs. She hadn't missed them. She was sold a carefully constructed life by Marcus, a man who curated his entire existence, and by Victoria, who had been protecting the family's public image for 40 years. It wasn't foolishness. It was a deep-seated trust. She wanted their life to be as perfect as the art he sold. Her love had made her too agreeable. She closed the Notes app. Lying in the dark, she felt anger return. Not the hot, tear-streaked rage from the night before, but a cold, focused fury that arrives when you finally see someone clearly, without the soft focus of love. He must have known she would see the charge for the pendant on their shared account. He had sat right beside her on the couch while she was researching bassinets. He just watched her, his expression placid, like an architect observing a planned demolition from a safe distance. For 4 years, she knew Marcus hated direct conflict. She had always been his buffer, managing Victoria's expectations and calming the nerves of difficult clients. She was done being his social manager. She was finished making his life comfortable at her own expense. She saw now that in the quiet, peaceful world she had built to keep him happy, something else had grown. By shrinking herself to make room for his ambition, she had created a vacuum, and Isabel had drifted right into it. That was the thought that finally broke her. It was more than just anger at Marcus. It was anger at herself, at the polite, accommodating woman who bit her tongue through Victoria's condescending remarks and never once said, "You don't get to speak to me that way." That woman was gone for good. At 4 in the morning, a new terror crept in. She hadn't felt the baby move for hours. She knew logically that it was probably fine. The pregnancy books all said that fetal movement can decrease at times, and it is rarely a cause for concern. She held her breath and waited. 1 minute bled into the next. Nothing. She laid a hand on her stomach. "Hey, little guy," she whispered. "Just give Mommy a nudge." Another silent minute ticked by, and she was already out of bed, rapping on her brother Leo's door before she even knew she'd decided to. She had promised herself she would handle this alone. That was the new plan. But her own hand betrayed her, hitting the door in an act of pure instinct. Leo opened it immediately, wide awake. "I haven't felt him kick," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sure it's fine. I know the odds. But I have to go." Leo simply nodded. "Grab your coat." He was dressed and had his keys in a minute. The emergency room was sterile and silent at 4:45 a.m. The fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving. A muted news report played on a TV in the corner. The nurse at the intake desk gave Alara a practiced, tired smile that she must have used hundreds of times a night. By 5:10, they were in a curtained-off bay. Dr. Chen, Alara's OB, arrived at 5:15. She was a calm, steady woman in her 50s, projecting an aura of competence that Alara always found comforting. Dr. Chen handled the ultrasound herself. The monitor came to life, and a steady, rhythmic pulsing filled the small room. Strong, consistent, 144 beats per minute. "There he is," Dr. Chen said gently. "Very busy. He's just flipped himself around. His back is to your front, which is why you aren't feeling the little jabs." Ilara stared at the screen, at the image of a tiny, perfect spine, and the wave of a small hand, a life completely ignorant of secret credit card charges and the men who make them. The tears started without permission. They were tears of profound relief, uncoiling a knot of terror in her gut, but also tears for a deeper sadness that had been silently growing for months. She wept quietly, the way you cry when you know you can't afford to fall apart. Leo quietly stepped out into the hallway. Dr. Chen sat on the edge of the bed and simply waited. "I'm sorry," Alara whispered. "I thought he was okay, but I couldn't." "You did exactly the right thing," the doctor interrupted. "You always come in. I don't care what any statistic says. Statistics are no help when you're by yourself in the middle of the night." Alara offered a faint smile. "You know, stress is physical," Dr. Chen continued. "It's not just an idea. Your body is in a state of alert. Your baby feels it. That is a medical factor." "I know. You have to find a way to get genuine rest, not just lie awake at night taking inventory of your wounds." Alara looked up at her. "How did you know?" "Because nearly every pregnant woman who comes in here at this hour has been doing that very thing." She stood. "What do you need, Alara? Not what you think you should do. What do you truly need?" The question stayed in the quiet room, an open invitation. It wasn't a challenge. Ilara considered it for a long moment. "I need to stop being someone that things just happen to," she said with sudden clarity. Dr. Chen nodded, not with sympathy, but with a look of deep, professional respect. "Then it's time to begin," she said. She went to process the discharge paperwork. Leo returned with 2 cups of coffee from a vending machine. He offered one to her without a word. She warmed her hands around the flimsy cup, letting the sterile quiet of the hospital settle around them. "He's okay," Leo stated. "He's okay," Alara echoed. A few seconds later, from further down the hall, they heard the sharp, sudden cry of a newborn baby. Ilara listened to the sound, while Leo stared at the scuffed linoleum floor. "Leo?" "Yeah. I'm calling that divorce lawyer today. I'll help you find the best in the city," he replied. No hesitation, no questions asked, just absolute support. They sipped the awful coffee as the world outside started to stir. The dark sky slowly bruised into a pre-dawn gray. Alara's phone began to buzz again. She was waiting for a file from Leo. This wasn't it. The notification on the screen was for Nina Vance. Clara stared at the name. Her brother Ben was pointedly ignoring her laptop. She opened the message. "I know I am the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk. You have to know the lies Leo has been telling me as well. I am so unbelievably sorry for my role in this mess." Clara read the words twice before turning the screen toward Ben. He read it, his expression hardening. "Are you going to respond, Dean?" Clara asked. "That," Ben said quietly, "is completely up to you." She looked at the message, then closed the laptop. First, she would get some sleep. Then she would contact the lawyer. After that, she would handle Nina. For 6 years, her entire life had been about smoothing things over for everyone else. Starting now, her own stability came first. 3 days later, they met in a Boston cafe, a neutral space near Ben's firm that Clara chose. She had already shared her live location with Ben. Her best friend Maya was parked on the next block, engine running, ready for what she termed emergency reinforcement. Nina was already inside at a small table, watching the entrance. She saw Clara enter, but made no signal. She looked nothing like her polished social media photos. The designer top was gone, replaced by a simple coat she kept on, as if poised to flee. The self-assured grin was replaced by an exhaustion that had taken root in her eyes. The last few days had obviously taken their toll on her too. "Thank you for meeting me," Nina said. Clara sat opposite her. "I'm still not entirely sure why I came." "I understand," Nina said. When the server arrived, Clara ordered a mint tea. Nina waved her away. "Tell me what you need to say," Clara said, her voice calm and level. "Leo told me," Nina started, "that you were aware of our relationship." Clara's face was unreadable. "He said you were essentially separated but living together. He told me this baby was an unexpected event you both had complicated feelings about. He swore you were okay with him dating. He told you I was fine with it." "I realize how that sounds," Nina added quickly. "I do. But I wanted it to be true, so I chose to believe him." Her hands were flat on the table. This wasn't an act. "I should have challenged him. I should have known. But trusting him was the easier path." "Yes," Clara said. "I understand that feeling perfectly." Nina met her gaze. "I've been on that same path for the last 6 years," Clara continued. Nina went quiet. "So, when you found the files," she said finally, "I need you to know I never wanted you to find out that way. I swear it. How did you think it was going to unfold?" "I believed him. He said he was going to tell you himself, that he had a plan to end things amicably. I didn't think he would just let it blow up like that." She shook her head. "That doesn't make my part in this any better. I know that." Clara watched her. So young. Not a villain. Just a woman. Just someone who had fallen for the pitch from a man who excelled at closing deals and was now dealing with the fallout. Forgiveness wasn't on the agenda today, and perhaps it never would be, not in the way people usually mean it. But finally, she could see her clearly, without the distortion of rage. "You said you had things to prove it," Clara said. "Show me." Nina took out her phone. She had everything saved: text screenshots, voicemails, the digital folder you build when your intuition screams at you, or the thread from May where Leo explicitly said Clara was in the loop. A text from July calling the pregnancy a timing issue, but not an emotional one. A string of emails from last month outlining his future, a future with Nina as the focus, with no mention of consulting his wife. She passed her phone across the table. Clara swiped through the evidence, reading with the cold analysis of an architect finding fatal flaws in a building's design, seeing the reality of the structure, not the fantasy it was sold as. He had lied, masterfully, to both of them. He told Nina that Clara knew and approved. He told Clara there was nothing to know. He had built two completely separate realities, giving each woman the exact story she needed to hear to keep her compliant. Not out of cruelty, she understood now, but because he was a man who could not stand to be the villain. He would invent an entire world of lies before he would ever stand in a room and be seen for what he was. He was managing us, Clara said, almost to herself. He told each of us whatever story would keep things calm. Nina didn't respond. "Do you still love him?" Clara asked. Nina was silent for a long moment. "I think I loved a character he played," she said. "I'm not sure that man even exists. At some point, I let myself be designed into the background," Clara thought. "Not into the background," Clara said aloud. "Into a box he designed." Nina looked at her. A current passed between them. Not friendship or forgiveness, but a raw, shared awakening. "You can use those," Nina said, pointing to the phone. "I will sign an affidavit. Just have your attorney send the documents." Ben looked at her, confused. "Why?" "Because her account is credible," Clara said, her gaze on the phone. "And for what he put her through. She is carrying his child. She never deserved any of this." "Neither did you," he answered. "You deserve the truth." She stood, grabbing her coat and bag. "My attorney will be in contact about the statement," she said. Ben just nodded. When Clara stepped outside, her friend Maya was already out of the car, rushing toward her. "So?" Maya asked. She confirmed every single thing, Clara said. Absolutely everything. The secret phone, the offshore accounts, the entire fabricated story. Clara walked toward the car. He had her thinking I was on board with it, that we had some kind of progressive, open relationship. Maya walked silently for a moment. "Okay, I need a second for my brain to process that. Take all the time you need." "I'm taking it," she said, stopping. "All right, how are you doing?" Clara gave it a real moment of consideration. "It's a weird feeling, like being numb but seeing every single detail in high definition," she said, as Maya unlocked the doors. "If it matters, I never trusted him," Maya confessed. "You were at our wedding. I wore that awful bridesmaid dress. That proves nothing." "No," Maya admitted, "but I still wore it." That afternoon, Ben took Clara to Mr. Croft's office. Croft was a sharp, meticulous man in his late 50s who used his glasses more for effect than for vision. He sat with Clara at a long conference table, reviewing the phone's contents and Leo's financial records, plus a damning letter from Leo's estranged father. He finally removed his glasses and looked at her. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "I want you to understand the leverage we have." Croft laid out the situation with calm confidence. The financials told a clear story. For the last 2 years, Leo had been redirecting money, not in big, obvious transfers, but a consistent trickle into accounts that would never show up on their joint filings. Nothing illegal, Croft clarified, but in a divorce, these actions establish clear intent. The phone's messages solidified that picture. In these messages, Croft said, you possess a digital trail of premeditated deception. Your husband described your marriage to a third party in a way that was entirely false. He lied about your knowledge and consent, and we can prove it. The court takes that very seriously. He then outlined what Clara could pursue. The Boston penthouse, a substantial financial award, and child support based on Leo's actual income, not his reported salary. His venture capital firm just closed a major fund, Croft remarked. He shot Ben a quick look. A silent confirmation of a more detailed prior talk passed between them. "He'll fight it," Clara said plainly. "His mother will force him to fight it." "That," Croft said, "is a completely different fight. Eleanor Sterling has no legal power in this office. Her only power is the decades of influence she has over a son who has never made a single move without her approval. Our strategy is to make the price of a fight so incredibly high that even she will see the logic in a settlement." Clara nodded slowly. She expected to be terrified sitting there. She had braced for it. Instead, she felt a profound quiet, the sense of a choice made months ago finally being set in motion. The decision wasn't made today. It was made in an emergency room at 3 a.m. This was just the follow-through. She found a condo that same week in Ben's building, a few floors down from him. "It's an empty unit. My pregnant sister has to be close by. That's the only story we're telling," he had said with finality. She allowed him that small white lie. She called Dr. Miller to have her prenatal files transferred closer to her new home. She informed her insurance company about the change of address. She received quotes from 2 different moving companies. She arranged it all in a single afternoon, with a legal pad and a pen, feeling a clarity of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. At last, she dialed her mother. Helen answered from the Chicago home where Clara was raised. Clara had been putting off this phone call. Helen truly loved Leo. She wasn't just faking the happy mother-in-law role. At their wedding, she had told Clara, "He's a good, decent man, honey. That is a very rare thing." And she meant it. But Helen, now 65, had seen enough of the world to handle a crisis without turning it into a drama. Sarah, a retired nurse, who had weathered life's storms, listened intently. She heard Chloe's entire story without one interruption. After a moment of silence, Sarah simply said, "I'm coming, Mom. It's not necessary. My flight is already booked." "I have the ticket," she replied, ending any debate. Liam arrived at the gallery the next afternoon. To Chloe's shock, a colleague showed him into the main atrium. She met him in that public space, ensuring she could walk away. Liam looked exhausted, as if he hoped sleeplessness could atone for his actions but found it was just lost sleep. "Can we talk, please?" he pleaded. "We are," she replied, her tone glacial. He slumped into a nearby seat. "I really do love you." She held his gaze steadily. "I know you do," she affirmed. "I don't question that for a moment." He seemed to exhale slightly at her words. "But I've been considering," she went on, "a love that offers no protection, a love that coexists with deceit and always chooses convenience over integrity." She glanced down at her lap. "That feeling is real, I see it. It's just not something to build a life on." "You said nothing," Chloe stated, her voice soft but firm, "at your firm's gala, when your mother introduced her. You let Eleanor belittle me when I was pregnant with our son. You just watched." He had no excuse. There wasn't one. His eyes admitted it. That truth gave her no satisfaction, just a heavy finality. "You need to cooperate with Ben," she said flatly. "For our son's sake, I won't turn this into a fight." A hand rested on her stomach. "But it's over. That part is not up for discussion." Liam just stared at the polished concrete floor and nodded. His eyes, filled with remorse, met hers. "Chloe, I'm so sorry," he managed to say. "I know that changes nothing, but it's true." "I know," she answered, turning away. She didn't sleep that night. Her mother, Sarah, would be flying into Seattle the next day. The movers were scheduled in 2 weeks. Her first meeting with Ben was on Friday. 1,000 tasks were vying for her attention. In her stark, new apartment kitchen, she began opening cupboards. At 2 in the morning, she decided to unpack. All 6 cabinets, the silverware drawer, and the high shelf, with her pregnancy making the lower ones a challenge. Seattle's lights twinkled outside as her mother slept nearby. She started sorting her books by color on the living room shelves, an act of control she never needed before. It now felt essential. She was in the blue section when Ben's name appeared on her phone. "It's 2 a.m., she answered. "I know. Are you organizing?" "Alphabetizing the spice rack." A brief, understanding quiet. "Of course you are." He hesitated for a moment. Ava posted on her social media feed today. It was a cloying message about fresh starts and professional ethics for their whole network to view. Chloe clutched a heavy art history textbook. "I saw. She also messaged me about her new chapter." William left their family dinner after 10 minutes. "He contacted my office today." Chloe went still. "My father-in-law called you," she echoed. "Yes. He has chosen a side. He's prepared to give a sworn statement," Ben continued. "And one more thing. You might want to sit." "I'm okay." "Chloe, please sit down." She slid to the floor, leaning against the bookshelf. An intern from Ava's team forwarded a screenshot from their internal work chat. He was bothered by the situation. Chloe gazed at the silver lettering on the book's cover. "It's a few messages," Ben said softly. She only needed one glance. A couple of text bubbles. It was Ava, bragging to a co-worker about the custom necklace from Liam. Her tone was smug, calling Chloe a temporary complication. "It's time to make way for people who actually matter," she had written, next to a picture of the jewelry design. Chloe handed the phone back. She didn't feel victorious. It was a quieter feeling, a deep sadness, like seeing an inevitable storm finally arrive. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Nothing," Ben replied. "We do nothing at all. The intern already shared it with others in their circle. The post and chat are circulating. Ava's trying to delete it, but screenshots are forever. The reputational harm is done." Chloe nodded, absorbing it. Chloe thought about Eleanor. For 4 years, she had tried to win her approval. She had downplayed her own success to placate Eleanor's ego, but now saw she was never the issue. Chloe was simply an impediment to Eleanor's vision for her son. No amount of placating could have fixed that. Seeing the proof brought no happiness, just a brief sense of pity. William delivered the files to Ben the following morning. The documents showed a shell corporation, revealing a pattern of diverted project funds for over a year. Not illegal, but deeply calculated. A systematic transfer of assets for a separation Eleanor was planning before Chloe was aware of any problem. While Chloe designed a nursery and endured Eleanor's condescending remarks about her career, her mother-in-law was ensuring Chloe would be left with very little. Ben showed the records to Liam, omitting William's involvement. Liam sat at the large table, his face ashen as he reviewed the papers. He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "She always said you weren't right for us," he confessed, "that our world would be too much for you." Ben asked, "And you said?" Liam's lack of response was the answer. Ben made a note. The intern from Liam's firm signed his affidavit without protest, sending a text to Chloe. "All the best?" Chloe replied, "Thank you." It was the last time they communicated for years. Eleanor's number flashed on her screen 3 times that week. Chloe ignored it. She let Ben manage everything. He was a barrier against the chaos. The final meeting was 2 weeks later at his downtown Seattle office. Eleanor and William, Chloe and Liam. With Ben as mediator, Eleanor seemed diminished, her usual rigidness replaced by a weary posture. She looked directly at Chloe. "What I did was inexcusable. I apologize." The apology was forced, costing her immensely. Chloe saw the price it took. She didn't say, "I forgive you." That felt out of reach. Instead, she just said, "Thank you." It was not a sign of softening. Chloe was a realist. It was an acknowledgement that actions have consequences, that you can't financially dismantle a person's life and emerge untouched. That knowledge had to be sufficient. Liam accepted every condition Ben put forward. He did not argue over the apartment. He didn't dispute the financial settlement. His new attorney was a sensible woman who knew an unwinnable case. The divorce was finalized with a speed that both surprised Chloe and seemed to unburden Liam, who may not have known the toll of his own deceptions. He became a more honest man once the lies were gone. She could recognize that without feeling any wish to reconcile. The baby was born on a Tuesday, March 31st, 6 weeks after she found the jewelry receipt, 3 weeks after the corporate funds were exposed. At 7:42 a.m., Ben was in the hospital waiting room. He had been there since 4 in the morning and never checked the time. Maya was there as well, with a bag of snacks, a magazine, and a special music playlist. Sarah, her mother, was in the room with her. Chloe had wanted her there. Her mother had flown in 2 days ahead of schedule, renting a condo just one floor below hers. She never once said, "I knew he was wrong for you." She just brewed chamomile tea, folded baby clothes, and spoke of simple things. Her new houseplant, a good book, the neighbor's friendly cat. Chloe knew this was love in its purest form, the act of keeping someone's world ordinary when it was falling into pieces. Liam was in the waiting room. He arrived right after Maya called. He stopped in the doorway and saw his son. A powerful emotion crossed his face. Not regret, not sadness, but a raw, profound wonder that was separate from all the damage. Just the reality of this small human. "He's here. That's my son. What's his name?" he asked quietly. "Ethan," Chloe said. "Ethan Cole." He nodded once. "It's a good name," he said. Chloe looked at him and knew he would love this child. Despite his failures with her, he would be a good father to his son. On that one piece of certainty, she could build a new life. It would be difficult. It would be her greatest challenge yet. But she could envision its framework, a life centered on Ethan's happiness, with enough space between his parents to keep it stable. She brought her son home on a Thursday in April to the condo near Ben's office. The apartment smelled of the white gardenias her mother had brought, her favorite, unlike the ostentatious roses Eleanor would have chosen. She placed Ethan in the bassinet she had assembled herself, in a room she painted a soft gray, under a mobile Maya had sent. She sat in the glider beside him. Outside, the city sounds of Seattle provided a steady rhythm. Downstairs, her mother was getting settled. She could call, and Sarah would be there in under 3 minutes. It was an undeniable truth. She didn't have to dwell on it. Bathed in the morning sun, she focused on her newborn son. Noah, barely 3 days old, took in the new sights around him. His small fists clenched and unclenched, searching for something to hold. A few weeks on, her family visited. Her brother Chris arrived with a feast of takeout, his way of showing affection. His wife, Jenna, settled comfortably on the floor. "I'm not risking this new couch while holding a newborn," Jenna announced, scooping Noah up with practiced ease. Her mother, Sarah, claimed the armchair by the lamp, now known as Nana's spot. And then there was her father. His being there was a surprise, yet it felt right. Robert had been the first of Julian's circle to offer her real support. He'd helped her connect with lawyers. He'd ensured she had the funds. He had left Julian's last disastrous family gathering. He was finally atoning for decades of choosing the easy path over the right one. She couldn't hold it against him. It was overdue, but she wouldn't shut him out now. Positioned by the window, he held Noah, his face pure adoration. Gone were the calculations, just a grandfather captivated by his grandson. Noah gazed back. Robert extended a finger, and the baby's hand latched on instantly. "Want some tea?" Chris asked quietly from the kitchen. "Just a little," Amelia murmured, her eyes on the baby. "She barely wants anything," Jenna commented under her breath. "It's good to have options," Chris answered gently. "Julian's office called," her mother Sarah mentioned from her chair. "What was the reason today?" Amelia asked tonelessly. "He says it was a clerical error," Sarah relayed. "Naturally," Amelia replied, unsurprised. A small, real smile formed on her face. It wasn't joy, but the start of it. An awareness that she was on firm, safe ground, like a warm spot on the hardwood floor. The baby shifted, a private signal meant only for her. Her brother and his wife bantered nearby. Her father observed her with gentle worry. She'd feared leaving the lavish emptiness, overlooking the warmth of her actual family. She once believed exiting the marriage was forfeiting all stability, but she'd been an outsider in that San Francisco high-rise. Another piece of art on display. This cozy room belonged to her. This family was her bedrock. No performance was needed. No feelings had to be managed. She could just exist. The baby stirred at 3 in the morning. Waking her, she sat in the quiet of her old room, hearing the soft sounds of her sleeping family. The quiet was filled with memories. An impulse arose to reach for her phone, check the travel account, see the hotel booking, reread Isabella's name on the confirmation, close the tab. She resisted. There was nothing left to confirm. No need to dig for proof she already had. No point in wishing for a different story. The digital receipt for that Napa weekend for 2 was irrefutable. Only her own breath and the slumbering city could be heard. Life went on, oblivious to her personal earthquake. She imagined herself a year prior in that cold, minimalist kitchen, hand on the quartz countertop, insisting she was happy. She'd tell her past self, "You stayed for your commitment, not from weakness. Your dedication is a virtue, not a fault." But a time will come, she'd warn, when staying costs you everything you are. You'll recognize that moment. Just leave. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling the future that was solely hers. I thought Julian's affair would destroy me, Amelia considered. Instead, it made me create a new start. I'm not the hopeful young woman he married. I'm not the architect who shelved her dreams for his. I am who I am becoming now. People assume you revert to your old self, but that person is gone. The past is another place. Returning is impossible and undesirable. This isn't a fallback, it's a new destination. Lying in her childhood bed, she realized the fancy prison was never locked. I just needed the strength to walk out. She felt the baby calm, a soft movement of contentment, a new soul preparing for a new world. Amelia shut her eyes, the phone ignored on the bedside table. The familiar house settled around her. The neighborhood was still. Her parents were asleep nearby. Tomorrow would bring legal calls and difficult conversations, the tedious task of separation. But that was for later. Tonight was calm. Earlier, her father, Robert, had just held her hand. He gave no opinions, only his solid support. It was as if he was surveying the wreckage and vowing to help her rebuild. Everyone important was with her, everyone who cared. She cradled her expectant belly. The future was unknown, but not frightening. For the first time in years, she felt completely in the moment, and she realized that wasn't just sufficient, it was everything. Note, this narrative was developed by our team to genuinely explore complex emotions for our readers. Each element was chosen to mirror the real challenges people encounter. This is a human story for a human audience, created with intention and not by simple automation. It was made with true empathy,